In the middle of the South China Sea, SEAL Team Delta was trapped, communications jammed, thunder rolling like artillery. Their SOS vanished into static as waves swallowed their last hope. Surrounded, low on ammo, and betrayed by weather and command alike, they braced for the end. Then one shot cracked through the storm. The echo tore through the rain, clean and cold. The enemy froze. That bullet didn't just kill a man. It told the world the SEALs weren't done fighting yet. Somewhere out there, the lone sniper was still alive and hunting. The South China Sea had turned hostile 3 hours before sunset. What started as routine cloud cover transformed into a Category 10 typhoon that swallowed the horizon whole. Rain hammered the rocky outcrop like machine gun fire, each drop a small violence against stone and flesh. Captain Marcus Harris pressed his back against the cliff face, feeling the vibration of thunder through solid rock. 6 men, that's all he had left. 6 operators from SEAL Team Delta, elite warriors reduced to refugees on a nameless island that didn't appear on most navigational charts. The helicopter wreckage still smoldered 2 clicks east, despite the downpour. Harris had watched it spiral down through the clouds, the tail rotor shredded by a surface-to-air missile that wasn't supposed to exist in these waters. The pilot, Commander Stevens, had kept them airborne for 90 seconds longer than physics allowed, giving them time to bail at 300 feet. Stevens hadn't made it out. "Radio's dead, sir." Petty Officer First Class Devon Wright held up the mangled communication unit, water streaming from his uniform. "Tried every frequency. We're broadcasting into nothing." Harris took the radio anyway, checked it himself. Protocol. The LED display flickered weakly, then died. Their lifeline to the USS Roosevelt, stationed 40 nautical miles northwest, was severed. No satellite uplink, no emergency beacon. The electromagnetic interference from the storm had turned their equipment into expensive paperweights. "Visual signals?" Harris asked, though he already knew the answer. "Visibility's less than 50 meters, Captain. Even if we had flares, they'd get swallowed by the cloud cover." Wright's face was grim, rain carving rivers through the camouflage paint. "We're ghosts out here, on the eastern ridge, barely visible through the sheets of rain." Staff Sergeant Ava Cole maintained her position. Harris could just make out her silhouette against the gray sky, prone behind her Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle. She hadn't moved in 40 minutes, hadn't signaled, hadn't complained. That was Ava Stone when Stone was needed. Harris had served with Cole for 3 years. She'd earned her spot on Delta through performance, not politics. 200 confirmed kills across 4 continents, most of them at ranges that defied belief. But it wasn't just the marksmanship. Ava possessed something rarer in special operations: the ability to become part of the landscape, to quiet her own heartbeat until she was indistinguishable from the environment itself. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the island in stark white clarity. For half a second, Harris saw everything. The dense jungle canopy 50 meters inland, the jagged rock formations that provided their current shelter, the churning sea beyond. Then darkness swallowed it all again, and the thunder that followed felt like the world cracking open. "Sir, Petty Officer Chen needs attention." Hospital Corpsman Second Class Robert Hayes knelt beside their medic, who was clutching his left side. Chen had taken shrapnel during the helicopter's death spiral, fragments from the missile punching through the fuselage. Hayes had plugged the wounds, but Chen was losing blood despite the pressure bandages. "How long can he move?" Harris asked quietly. Hayes glanced at Chen, then back at Harris. "He'll move until he can't. You know Leo." Petty Officer Leo Chen managed a weak grin despite his pallor. "Still breathing, Captain. Still got both hands. I'm mission capable." They were all lying to each other now. Mission capable. As if this was still a mission and not a survival scenario spiraling toward catastrophic failure. Their objective had been straightforward: insert onto the island, gather intelligence on suspected weapons, smuggling operations, extract before dawn. Clean, simple, routine. Instead, they'd flown into an ambush. Someone had known their flight path, their timing, their radio frequencies. The missile had been waiting, and now 6 operators were stranded in a typhoon with hostiles hunting them through the darkness. Chief Petty Officer Jackson Moore appeared from the southern approach, moving low and fast despite the wind trying to knock him sideways. At 42, Moore was the oldest operator on the team, a career SEAL who'd been fighting America's wars since before Harris graduated high school. "Got movement," Moore reported, water dripping from his beard. "Thermal signatures, 300 meters southwest. At least a dozen, maybe more. They're organizing. setting up a perimeter. Identification? Not regular military. Equipment's too mixed. Probably contractors. Moore's expression darkened. Professional contractors. They're moving like they know what they're doing. That complicated everything. Regular military forces might withdraw in weather like this, wait out the storm before resuming the hunt. But contractors, mercenaries paid by the kill, they'd press the advantage. They knew Delta couldn't call for help, couldn't evac, couldn't do anything but hide and pray. Harris looked up at the ridge where Ava maintained her vigil. As if sensing his attention, she signaled, 2 fingers, then a closed fist. Contact. Hold position. The storm screamed around them, wind velocity pushing 70 knots. The rain had soaked through their gear hours ago, turning everything heavy and cold. Harris's fingers were numb around his M4 carbine, and he had to consciously focus to maintain his grip. "We need to send a signal," Lieutenant James Parker said. At 28, Parker was the youngest officer on the team, sharp and capable, but still learning the difference between tactics and survival. "If we can rig something visible from altitude, any signal we send, they'll see first," Moore interrupted. "We light up, we die. So we just wait? Hide in the rocks until they find us or we bleed out?" "We wait for an opening," Harris said firmly. "We assess, we adapt, we act when the odds shift." But the odds weren't shifting. They were deteriorating with every minute. Chen's breathing was becoming labored. Their ammunition was limited, maybe 30 rounds per operator, plus whatever Ava had for the Barrett. The storm provided concealment, but also stripped away their technological advantages. No night vision in this darkness, no thermal imaging through the rain, just meat and metal and the storm's indifferent fury. Thunder rolled again, closer now, and in the flash of lightning that followed, Harris saw Ava turn her head fractionally toward him. Even at this distance, even through the storm, he understood her message. They were running out of time. The silence between thunder was heavy, pregnant with violence. Somewhere out there in the darkness, trained killers were closing in. And no one in the world knew SEAL Team Delta was fighting for their lives on a rock in the South China Sea. No one heard their SOS. No one was coming. They were alone. Harris made the call 90 minutes after nightfall, when it became clear the storm wouldn't break before dawn. They needed help, and they needed it now. Waiting for optimal conditions was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Right, Moore, rig every light source we have. I want Morse code broadcasting on repeat. SOS and our grid coordinates." Harris checked his compass, calculated their approximate position. "Chen, you're on the tactical beacon. Even if the regular radio's fried, maybe the emergency transponder can punch through." "Sir, that beacon's gonna light us up like a Christmas tree on any thermal scope within a click," Moore warned. "We activate that, we're inviting them right to us. They already know roughly where we are. If there's any chance the Roosevelt picks up that signal, we take it." Harris met Moore's eyes. "We don't die quiet in the dark, Chief. We make noise until someone hears." They worked quickly, efficiently, the way operators do when every second counts. Wright and Moore assembled a makeshift signal device from flashlights and reflective materials salvaged from their gear. The Morse code was basic, something any military observer would recognize. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. Save our souls. Chen activated the emergency beacon despite his injuries, his face tight with pain as he worked the controls. The device emitted a high-frequency pulse, theoretically detectable by satellite and any friendly vessel within range. Theoretically, in practice, with electromagnetic interference from the storm scrambling every spectrum, they might as well be shouting into the void. Hayes kept pressure on Chen's wounds while the medic worked, his expression grim. "Leo, you need to slow down or you're going to pass out." "I pass out after we get rescued," Chen muttered through gritted teeth. "Not before." On the ridge, Ava maintained overwatch, scanning the approaches through her scope. The Barrett was equipped with a thermal sight, but in conditions like this, with rain cooling every surface and wind dispersing heat signatures, thermal imaging was only marginally better than naked eye observation. She relied instead on movement, on the patterns that training couldn't quite erase from human behavior. She'd been in situations like this before. Afghanistan, 2019. Her spotter had been killed by an IED, leaving her alone on a mountainside with Taliban fighters closing in from 3 directions. She'd sent her distress signal, called for extraction, broadcast her position until her throat was raw and her radio batteries died. No one had come. She'd walked 17 miles through hostile territory, moving only at night, living on rainwater and raw determination. When she finally reached the forward operating base, The operations officer had been shocked to see her. Her distress calls had never been received. Equipment, malfunction, signal degradation, bad luck. Ava had learned then what every operator eventually learns. In the end, you save yourself. You can call for help. You can hope for rescue. But survival depends on what you do in the moments when no one's listening. Lightning illuminated the island again, and in that brief flash, Ava saw them. Figures moving through the jungle, tactical and deliberate. She counted 8 in her field of view, which meant there were probably twice that many spread across the island. They were setting up a cordon, classic hunter-killer tactics. Squeeze the perimeter, eliminate escape routes, then move in for the kill when the prey has nowhere left to run. She keyed her radio twice, a simple click, click, that told Harris what he needed to know. Contact, multiple hostiles, close. Down in the rocks, Harris heard the signal and felt his stomach tighten. Lights off. Kill the beacon. Now, right, douse the Morse lamp immediately. Chen hesitated for just a second. That beacon was their last link to the outside world, but then shut it down. The sudden darkness felt absolute, oppressive. "They've got us spotted?" Parker asked, his voice tight. "They're moving into position." Ava's got eyes on at least 8. Rules of engagement. Moore already had his weapon up, finger outside the trigger guard but ready. Harris calculated rapidly. They could engage now, try to break contact and disappear into the jungle. But wounded, outnumbered, and disoriented in the storm, that would likely end in a running firefight they couldn't win. Or they could hold position, hope the enemy passed them by, save their ammunition for when they had no other choice. "We're ghosts," Harris decided. "No fire unless they're on top of us. Ava, you're authorized to engage any immediate threat to the team, but keep it surgical. 1 shot, 1 kill, then reposition." 2 clicks, acknowledged. The next 20 minutes stretched like hours. The enemy moved through the darkness, methodical and patient. Harris could hear them now, voices carried on the wind, brief snatches of radio chatter in accented English. Contractors, professionals, probably former military from a dozen different countries, united by the common language of violence and paychecks. One group passed within 30 meters of their position, so close that Harris could see the glow of a cigarette briefly sheltered from the rain. They were arguing about something, gesturing toward the southeast, debating which sector to search first. Then they moved on, swallowed by the storm. When Ava finally signaled all clear, Harris released a breath he hadn't known he was holding. They'd survived the first pass, but it was only a matter of time before the net tightened. "Why aren't we hearing rotors?" Parker whispered. "The Roosevelt should have birds in the air by now. Even in this weather, they'd send someone." Harris had been wondering the same thing. The carrier group knew their mission timeline. When they'd missed their first check-in 90 minutes ago, standard protocol would have initiated search and rescue procedures. By now, there should be MH-60 Seahawks vectoring toward their last known position, pilots fighting the storm to reach them, but the sky remained empty except for rain and lightning. No rotors, no radio contact, nothing. "Maybe the storm's worse than we thought," Hayes suggested. "Maybe they grounded all air operations. Or maybe," Moore said quietly, "someone doesn't want us found." The words hung in the air like a curse. Harris wanted to reject the idea immediately, but he couldn't. The ambush had been too precise, too well-timed. Their flight path had been classified, known only to a handful of people. The missile had been positioned exactly where it needed to be. And now, when they needed rescue most desperately, the silence from command was deafening. "Speculation doesn't help us," Harris said firmly. "We focus on what we can control." "Right. Can you rig a directional antenna? If we can't broadcast omnidirectional, maybe we can aim a tight beam signal toward the Roosevelt's position." "I can try, sir, but without knowing why we're being jammed. I'm just guessing." "Then guess smart." Harris looked up toward the ridge, where Ava remained invisible in the darkness. "We've got a sniper, 5 rifles, limited ammunition, and a storm that's either our best friend or our executioner. We're not dying on this rock. We're going to make enough noise that someone, somewhere, hears us." But even as he said it, Harris felt the weight of command pressing down. He was responsible for these men, for their lives, for getting them home. And right now, all his training and experience couldn't change the fundamental equation. They were trapped, surrounded, and every SOS they sent disappeared into static. The storm screamed its answer, indifferent to their struggle. Thunder rolled like distant artillery, promising no peace, No respite, just rain and wind, and the certainty that somewhere in the darkness, the enemy was regrouping for another sweep. And still, no one answered their call. At 0200 hours, Chen's condition deteriorated sharply. His breathing had become shallow and rapid, his skin cold and clammy despite the humid air. Hayes worked frantically, checking vitals, adjusting bandages, but they all knew what it meant: internal bleeding, shock setting in, time running out. "We need to move," Hayes said urgently. "He needs a surgical team, real medical equipment. Another 6 hours in these conditions, and we lose him." Harris knew Hayes was right, but movement meant exposure. The enemy was still out there, still searching. Where do we go? Moore had been studying their tactical map, such as it was a waterlogged satellite image with rough terrain features. There's a ravine system about 2 clicks northeast, dense canopy, multiple egress routes. If we can reach it before dawn, we might be able to hole up and reassess. 2 clicks through hostile territory in zero visibility, Parker said. That's a gauntlet. It's a chance, Moore countered. Which is more than we have sitting here waiting to be overrun. Harris looked toward Ava's position. In the darkness, she was invisible, but he knew she was listening on the radio. "Cole, assessment?" Her voice came back whisper quiet. "Northeast corridor shows minimal traffic. They're concentrating search efforts to the south and west. We've got maybe a 3-hour window before they expand the perimeter. After that, the ravine becomes a kill box. Decision time." Harris weighed the variables: Chen's condition, their ammunition status, the enemy's movement patterns, the storm's intensity. Every option carried risk. Every choice could be the one that got them all killed. "We move in 15 minutes, Harris decided. "Light load, weapons only. Moore takes point, Ava provides overwatch and rear security. Wright and Hayes carry Chen. Parker, you're with me on flanking support. We move quiet, we move fast, and if we make contact, we break toward the ravine and regroup." They prepared quickly, redistributing ammunition, stripping away non-essential gear. Chen was barely conscious now, but he forced himself to stay quiet as Hayes and Wright rigged a makeshift stretcher from their tactical vests and paracord. Ava descended from the ridge like a shadow, the Barrett across her back, her sidearm drawn. She moved to Harris's position, her face streaked with rain and camouflage paint. "Sir, they've got thermal drones up. I've spotted 3 so far, quartering the island in a search pattern. Can you take them out?" She considered. The Barrett would drop them easy, but the sound signature would give away our position to every hostile within a half-click. "It's your call, but I'd recommend we stay dark unless absolutely necessary." Harris nodded. "We goes through. Weapons tight unless they're on top of us." They moved out at 0215, 6 operators carrying their wounded through a typhoon that showed no signs of weakening. Moore led, using night vision that was barely functional in the conditions, picking a path through rocks and vegetation. Every 50 meters, he'd stop, signal back, wait for the team to close up before continuing. The jungle was alien at night, transformed by the storm into something hostile and unfamiliar. Tree branches whipped in the wind, palm fronds sliced like razors, and the rain created a constant white noise that made audio detection nearly impossible. They navigated by lightning flash and instinct, each man trusting the operator ahead, covering angles, watching for threats that could emerge from any direction. 15 minutes into the movement, Ava signaled contact. Harris dropped, brought his weapon up, scanned the darkness. At first, he saw nothing. Then lightning flashed, and there they were. 4 contractors, maybe 40 meters to the south, moving parallel to their route. Had they been spotted? Harris held his breath, watching. The contractors continued their patrol, oblivious. The teams were passing in the night like ships in a storm, each hunting the other, neither aware of how close death had come. They waited 3 full minutes after the enemy passed, then continued. Chen moaned softly despite his efforts at silence, pain breaking through his control. Hayes whispered something to him, probably lies about how they'd reach medical care soon, how he'd be fine, how it would all be okay. The necessary lies that kept dying men fighting a little longer. At 0245, they reached the ravine system. It was exactly as Moore had described, a network of steep-sided gullies carved into the island's volcanic rock, choked with vegetation and darkness. Water rushed through the bottom, ankle-deep and rising, but the overhead canopy provided concealment from aerial observation. "Set up a defensive perimeter," Harris ordered. "Ava, find high ground with good sight lines. Everyone else, sectors of fire. We hold here until dawn, then reassess." They were settling into position when Parker hissed a warning, "Movement, east side." Harris spun, weapon up. Through the rain and darkness, he could barely make out figures approaching the ravine. How many? 3? 5? They were moving cautiously, weapons ready. Clearly having detected something, maybe noise from Chen, maybe just bad luck. The distance closed to 30 meters. 20. 15. "Ava," Harris whispered into his radio. "You have the shot." She'd positioned herself on the ravine's western slope, the Barrett already tracking. Through her thermal scope, she could see them clearly now. 6 hostiles, tactical formation, definitely professionals. The lead man was using hand signals, directing his team to spread out and surround the ravine entrance. They'd been found. The math was simple and brutal. If she didn't take the shot, the enemy would be on top of them in seconds, and in close quarters with a wounded man to protect, Delta team would be overwhelmed. But if she fired, every hostile within a click would converge on their position. Sometimes there are no good choices. Sometimes you just pick the option that lets you survive the next 60 seconds and worry about the rest later. Ava controlled her breathing, let her heartbeat slow, became the weapon. Thunder rolled overhead, and in that moment between lightning and darkness, she squeezed the trigger. The Barrett spoke once, its report swallowed by thunder but unmistakable to anyone who knew weapons. The lead hostile dropped instantly, his thermal signature disappearing from her scope. Before his body hit the ground, Ava was already repositioning, scrambling up the slope as return fire tore through the vegetation where she'd been lying seconds before. "Contact!" Moore's voice cut through the chaos. Multiple hostiles, east and south. The jungle erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like strobes, tracer rounds cutting through the rain in bright geometric patterns. Harris returned fire in controlled bursts, dropping one contractor, then another. Parker moved to protect Chen and Hayes, his M4 barking rapid semi-automatic shots, but there were too many. For every hostile that fell, 2 more appeared. They were converging from multiple directions, having clearly planned for exactly this scenario. "Ava, we need suppression," Harris shouted into his radio. "Buy us 30 seconds. On the slope above, Ava had reached her fallback position. The Barrett was designed for long-range precision, not close-quarters combat, but right now she just needed to make noise and fear. She acquired targets through the thermal scope and fired the massive 50 caliber rounds punching through vegetation and body armor with equal ease. Each shot was a small violence, a declaration that they weren't prey, that they'd make this expensive for anyone trying to kill them. 1 hostile, 2, 3. Her magazine held 10 rounds, and she'd already expended 4. 6 left. Make them count. Below, Harris saw their window closing. Right, more smoke. Everyone into the ravine, now. Smoke grenades popped, gray-white clouds billowing through the rain. It wouldn't last long in these conditions, but it didn't need to. Just enough time to break contact, to disappear into the ravine system's darkness. They moved as a unit, Hayes and Wright carrying Chen, Parker providing rear security, Moore leading them deeper into the gullies. The water was waist-deep now, rising fast from the storm runoff, but it would hide their thermal signatures and wash away their trail. Ava fired her final rounds, then abandoned the Barrett with a pain that felt physical. That rifle had been with her for 4 years, an extension of her own body. But sentiment gets you killed in combat. She dropped down into the ravine, her sidearm drawn, and followed her team into the darkness. Behind them, the gunfire continued for another 30 seconds as the contractors swept the perimeter, then slowly faded. They'd lost the trail in the smoke and rain and rushing water. For now, Harris counted heads in the darkness. 6 operators, all still breathing. Chen had lost consciousness, but Hayes gave a thumbs up, still alive, still salvageable if they could reach medical care. "How long before they find us again?" Parker asked, spitting water. "Not long enough," Moore answered. "They know we're in the ravine system. They'll seal both ends and sweep through until they find us." Harris looked at the faces around him, at operators who'd followed him into hell without question. They were exhausted, low on ammunition, burdened with a wounded man, hunted by an enemy that seemed to know their every move. And still, no rescue. Still, no response to their SOS. Still, nothing but rain and violence, and the growing certainty that they'd been abandoned. Somewhere above, thunder rolled like the laughter of gods who no longer cared about the struggles of men in the mud. They found shelter in a cave carved into the ravine's northern wall, barely large enough for 6 men but concealed behind a curtain of falling water. Hayes worked on Chen by the dim glow of a shielded flashlight, his movements increasingly frantic as he tried to stabilize injuries that needed an operating room, not a wet cave in hostile territory. Moore established security at the entrance, while Wright attempted once more to raise someone, anyone, on the damaged radio. The static was maddening, a constant white noise punctuated by brief moments of what might have been voices, or might have been ghosts in the signal. Harris sat apart, trying to process what he'd learned in the last 2 hours. Something was fundamentally wrong with this mission, wrong in ways that went beyond bad luck or tactical errors. The pieces didn't fit, and the pattern they formed when he forced them together was ugly. Captain, Ava had materialized beside him, silent despite the confined space. Water dripped from her uniform, from her hair, from the barrel of her sidearm. "We need to talk." "I know. Sir, with respect, I don't think you do." Her voice was quiet but carried an edge. "I've been thinking about the ambush. The timing, the missile placement. So have I." They knew exactly when we'd be overhead. They had a clear shot in a 10-second window. That's not luck, that's intelligence. Harris had reached the same conclusion 3 hours ago but hadn't wanted to voice it, as if saying it aloud would make it real. "Someone leaked our flight path. More than that," Ava continued. "They knew our radio frequencies. The jamming started the moment we went down, targeted, specific. And now, when we should have half the 7th Fleet vectoring to our position, we get nothing but silence." She paused. "Sir, I think someone wants us dead. Someone on our side." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. In special operations, you learn to trust your chain of command absolutely. That trust is what allows missions to function, what lets operators risk their lives on orders from people they've never met. Break that trust, and the entire system collapses. "That's a serious charge," Harris said carefully. "I know. But explain it another way. Explain why the carrier group isn't tearing this island apart looking for us." Harris couldn't. He'd been trying for hours, running through scenarios, looking for alternatives. Equipment malfunction. Possible, but not for this long. Weather too severe for rescue? The Navy operated in worse conditions routinely. Miscommunication about their position? They'd broadcast their coordinates repeatedly. The only explanation that made sense was the one he didn't want to accept. Someone had classified this mission as expendable and everyone on it as acceptable losses. "Right?" Harris called over. "What was our mission briefing again? The full scope?" Wright looked up from the radio, confused. "Sir, we covered this before insertion. Reconnaissance of suspected weapons, smuggling operations. Gather intelligence on shipment routes and schedules. Standard SOS sensitive site exploitation." And who authorized the mission? Commander Jacobs out of NavCent. The orders came down through JSOC like always. Wright's expression shifted as he understood what Harris was asking. "Sir, are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting we review what we know." Harris kept his voice level, professional. "We were inserted to gather intelligence on weapons smuggling. But what kind of weapons? Who was buying? Who was selling?" The briefing materials mentioned Chinese-manufactured armaments being routed through third-party vendors to prohibited buyers, Parker said. Possible North Korean end users. It was flagged as a potential violation of UN sanctions. "High-value intelligence," Moore added, "the kind that could justify a lot of operational risk." Harris nodded slowly. "Or the kind that someone wouldn't want exposed." "Right. Before we lost communications, did you get any traffic from command? Anything unusual? Just the standard check-in protocols until—" Wright trailed off, his face going pale. "Wait. About 20 minutes before we were hit, I got a flash traffic message. Encrypted, command-level priority. I logged it for you to decrypt after the mission. Where's that data now?" Wright pulled a waterproof case from his vest, extracted a small encrypted drive. "Right here. But sir, without proper decryption keys, give it to me." Harris took the drive, turned it over in his hands. This small piece of hardware might contain the answers they needed, or it might be nothing. But in intelligence work, timing was everything. A command priority message 20 minutes before an ambush wasn't coincidence. "Can we crack it?" Ava asked. "Not without the right equipment. And probably not without triggering a tamper protocol that would wipe the data." Harris pocketed the drive. "But someone wants what's on here badly enough to shoot down a helicopter and hunt us across an island." The implications settled over the group like a weight. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were carrying intelligence that someone, possibly someone in their own chain of command, considered worth killing to suppress. "So what do we do?" Parker asked. "If we can't trust command, who do we call for help?" "We document everything," Harris decided. "Every detail of the ambush, the timing, our failed communications attempts." "Right. Can you rig a one-way burst transmission? Something we can aim at a specific receiver without broadcasting our location?" "Maybe, if I cannibalize parts from the beacon and the radio." "But who would we send it to?" "Admiral Morrison," Moore suggested. "Commander, 7th Fleet. He's 4 levels above whoever planned this mission. If there's corruption, it's probably contained at the operational level, not strategic command." It was a gamble, but they were out of safe options. "Do it," Harris ordered. "Tight beam transmission, minimum power, aimed at the Roosevelt's position. Include our grid coordinates and a request for immediate extraction. And right? Market priority alpha direct to Admiral Morrison's attention. No intermediaries. That's going to take time to set up, sir. Maybe 2 hours. Then you better start now." While Wright worked, Hayes continued his desperate efforts to keep Chen stable. The medic's condition was critical now, his breathing ragged, his pulse thready. Without proper surgical intervention, he had hours at most. Harris watched his team work, saw the exhaustion in their movements, the strain in their faces. These were the best operators in the U.S. military, trained to handle impossible situations, conditioned to perform under stress that would break most people. But everyone has limits, and they were approaching theirs. "Ava," he said quietly, "you were in a situation like this before. Afghanistan." She didn't look up. "Yes, sir. You sent distress signals that were never received. Equipment malfunction. That's what they told me after." "Do you believe that?" Ava was silent for a long moment. "I believe that sometimes the truth is classified above our clearance level, and sometimes we're not supposed to survive to ask questions." It was the closest she'd come to confirming his worst fears. In black operations, in the shadow wars fought by special operations forces, sometimes missions went wrong in ways that couldn't be acknowledged. Sometimes units were disavowed, left behind, erased from official records. Was that what was happening here? Had they stumbled onto something so sensitive that their own government considered them liabilities? "Sir?" Moore's voice cut through his thoughts. "We've got company." Harris moved to the cave entrance. Through the curtain of water, he could see lights moving in the ravine below. Flashlights, thermal scanners, the methodical sweep of a professional search team. They'd been found again. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. Dawn was still 2 hours away when the enemy began their final approach. Through the falling water at the cave entrance, Harris counted at least 20 hostiles, possibly more waiting in reserve. They were taking their time, clearing every meter of the ravine with textbook precision. "How did they find us?" Parker whispered. "Doesn't matter now," Moore replied, checking his ammunition. 3 magazines left, maybe 90 rounds total. Against 20 trained contractors with full combat loads, that was barely a speed bump. Wright was still working on the transmission rig, his hands shaking with exhaustion and cold as he spliced wires and reconfigured circuits. "5 more minutes," he muttered. "Just give me 5 more minutes." They didn't have 5 minutes. The enemy was less than 100 meters away, moving cautiously but steadily up the ravine. Any moment now, they'd spot the cave, and then it would be over. 6 operators in a confined space against an overwhelming force. The math didn't lie. Hayes had given up trying to stabilize Chen. The medic was unconscious now, his breathing barely perceptible. Hayes sat back against the cave wall, his hands covered in blood, his expression hollow. He'd done everything possible, used every trick learned in a career of battlefield medicine, and it still wasn't enough. Ava crouched beside Harris, her sidearm ready, counting enemies through the water curtain. 22 that I can see. Probable Overwatch teams on the ridges. They're boxing us in. Can we break through? We'd need to punch through their center, fight our way up the ravine, and maintain speed while carrying Chen. She paused. We'd lose at least half the team, probably more. And for what? To die running instead of fighting? Harris knew she was right. The tactical situation was hopeless. They were outgunned, outnumbered, trapped in a position with no escape routes. Every operator understood that sometimes you ended up in scenarios where valor and skill didn't matter, where the only variable was how many of the enemy you could take with you before the end. But that wasn't good enough. He hadn't spent 15 years as a SEAL to die in a cave because someone in command had decided his team was expendable. If they were going down, he'd make sure the truth got out, make sure whoever had betrayed them answered for it. Right? Status? Almost there, sir. just connecting the power supply. An explosion shattered the relative quiet. 30 meters down the ravine, a grenade detonated against the rock wall, sending shrapnel and stone fragments spraying through the water. The enemy was probing their defenses, testing for response. Moore returned fire, 3 quick bursts that dropped one contractor and sent the others scrambling for cover. Contact! They know we're here. The cave entrance erupted with incoming fire. Bullets ricocheted off stone, punched through the water curtain, filled the confined space with the screaming whine of near misses. Harris fired back, controlled pairs, aiming for the muzzle flashes in the darkness. Ava moved to the cave's left side, finding an angle where she could see farther down the ravine. Her sidearm barked twice, and another hostile fell. But there were too many. For every one they dropped, 3 more appeared. Right, Harris shouted over the gunfire. We're out of time. Almost. Got it. Wright made one final connection, and the jury-rigged transmission rig came to life. A weak LED indicator glowed green, system active. Ready to transmit. Sir, we're live, but I can only send once. After that, the battery's dead. One shot's all we need. Harris pulled out the encrypted drive containing the command priority message. Transmit everything. Our coordinates, our situation. This drive's contents raw data, no decryption. Let Admiral Morrison sort it out. Wright's fingers flew across the makeshift control panel. Uploading. 50%. 75. Another explosion. Closer this time. The enemy was advancing under covering fire, using grenades to suppress the cave entrance while they moved forward. Standard assault tactics. In another minute, they'd be close enough to toss grenades directly into the cave. 90%. Almost there. Moore's M4 went dry. He dropped the empty magazine, slammed in a fresh one, his last. Captain, we need to move or we're dead. Hold position. Harris fired until his own weapon clicked empty, then transitioned to his sidearm. Beside him, Ava was doing the same, her movements automatic despite the chaos. They'd trained for this, drilled it thousands of times. How to fight when everything's gone wrong, when ammunition's running low, when the only certainty is that you're about to die. Transmission complete. Wright yanked the power cable free, and the rig went dark. Message away. Sir, it's in the Admiral's hands now. But the Admiral was 40 nautical miles away, probably asleep in his quarters on the Roosevelt. By the time anyone received the transmission, analyzed the data, and authorized a rescue operation, Team Delta would be 6 bodies in a cave. Harris made the hardest call of his career. Ava, take Chen and Hayes. Move up the western slope. Use the vegetation for cover. Wright, Parker, you're with them. Moore and I will hold here. Buy you as much time as we can. Sir, Ava started to protest. That's an order, Staff Sergeant. Someone needs to survive this to tell what happened. That's you. Harris met her eyes, saw the understanding there. Make them remember us. Make sure whoever did this pays. She nodded once, then moved. Hayes and Wright lifted Chen between them, conscious again and clearly understanding what was happening. Parker provided security as they slipped out the cave's rear opening, a crack in the rock barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Ava was last to leave. She paused at the opening, looked back at Harris and Moore. For a moment, she seemed about to speak, to say something about honor or duty or the brotherhood of operators who fight impossible battles. But there was nothing to say that they didn't already know. She disappeared into the darkness, leaving Harris and Moore alone with their weapons and their choice. Hell of a last stand, sir. Moore said calmly, reloading his pistol. Could be worse, Harris replied. Could be raining. They both looked at the water pouring through the cave entrance and allowed themselves a brief, dark laugh. Then the enemy was on them, and there was no more time for humor or philosophy, only the fundamental equation of combat. Kill or be killed, and try to make the cost high enough that it means something. Harris fired until his sidearm locked back empty. Moore lasted 30 seconds longer, dropping 2 more contractors before a grenade rolled into the cave and the world became fire and thunder and then nothing at all. In the darkness outside, Ava heard the explosion and kept moving. Behind her, Hayes stumbled under Chen's weight, and Wright helped steady them. Parker maintained rear security, his weapon trained on the approach routes, ready to buy them seconds if pursuit caught up. They climbed through the storm, through the rain that wouldn't stop, through vegetation that tore at their uniforms and faces. Chen's breathing was shallow, labored. Hayes's face was grim with the certainty that they were carrying a dying man. But they climbed anyway, because that's what operators do. They complete the mission, They honor their orders, they keep moving until movement is no longer possible. Far behind them, in a cave that would become an unmarked grave, Captain Marcus Harris and Chief Petty Officer Jackson Moore had bought them that chance with their lives. And now, in the gray hour before dawn, 3 survivors carried the truth up a mountainside toward a day they might not see. Ava found her position as the storm began its final act. The ridge offered clear sight lines across the island's eastern approaches, and more importantly, it gave her elevation over the compound she'd spotted during their climb. The facility sat in a natural depression, camouflaged under thermal reflective netting but visible to anyone who knew what to look for. 3 prefab structures, a communications array that explained the signal jamming, and a makeshift helipad with 2 helicopters. One of them bore markings she recognized: private military contractor, registered out of Singapore but operating under a shell company linked to an arms dealer the CIA had been tracking for 2 years. This was it, the heart of the smuggling operation they'd been sent to investigate, and probably the reason they'd been ambushed. Someone didn't want this place documented, didn't want the evidence of who was buying and selling reaching official channels. Below the ridge, Hayes and Wright had found shelter in a cluster of rocks, chin stretched between them. The medic was still breathing, but barely. Another hour, maybe 2 at most, before his body gave up the fight. Parker crouched nearby, covering their position, but his attention kept drifting to Ava. "What are you planning?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. The Barrett was gone, left behind during their escape from the ravine. But she'd salvaged something almost as useful from one of the contractors they'd killed during the retreat. An SR-25 marksman rifle with a thermal scope and 6 magazines. Not her preferred weapon, but she'd qualified expert with every rifle system the military used. The fundamentals didn't change. "The compound," she said finally. "That communications array is what's jamming our signals. Take it out, and our transmission to Admiral Morrison might actually get through." "That's a suicide run," Parker said flatly. "There's at least 40 hostiles down there, probably more. You wouldn't make it halfway before they cut you down." "I'm not going down there. I'm shooting from here." Ava was already doing the calculations. Range approximately 800 meters, wind gusting 30 to 40 knots from the northeast, rain creating visibility issues but also providing acoustic cover. Difficult shot, but possible. Even if you hit the array, it won't matter. They'll repair it or activate backup systems. Not if I hit the right component. Communication systems have single points of failure. Destroy the primary transmitter assembly, and it takes hours to replace. She glanced at him. "Hours we can use." Parker studied her face, saw the cold determination there. "You're not planning to come back from this, are you?" "I'm planning to complete the mission." Ava chambered around, adjusted her scope for distance and wind. "Harris and Moore died buying us time. I'm going to make sure that means something." She settled into position, feeling the familiar focus narrow her world to breath and sight picture and trigger pressure. The rain was steady now, not the violent storm of earlier, but still enough to distort ballistics. She'd need to compensate, account for droplet interference, for wind drift, for the dozen variables that separated a good shot from a perfect one. Through the scope, she could see the communications array clearly. Multiple dishes, a central transmitter assembly, redundant power supplies. She needed to identify the primary system, the one component whose destruction would cause cascading failure across the entire network. There, the main transmitter housing, marked with a small red tag that indicated primary system status, military-grade jamming equipment, probably Russian or Chinese manufacture. One shot to that housing, and the interference would collapse. But it wasn't enough to just disable their jamming. She needed to send a message, to create enough chaos that rescue operations would have a window to reach them. And there was only one way to do that. "I'm going to need you to do something," Ava said to Parker. "When I take this shot, things are going to get loud down there. They'll be looking for the sniper, trying to pinpoint my position. That's when you take Chen and Hayes and move east, toward the beach. Don't wait for me. Don't look back. Just move." "Ava, that's an order, Lieutenant. You're in command now. Your job is to get those men somewhere visible, somewhere a rescue helicopter can find them." She looked at him directly. "My job is to make sure that helicopter can get through." Parker wanted to argue. She could see it in his eyes. But he was also a SEAL, trained to understand tactical necessity. Sometimes the mission required sacrifice. Sometimes one operator chose to become the target so others could escape. "Make it count," he said finally. Always do. She returned her attention to the scope, to the target 800 meters away. Her breathing slowed, deepened, fell into the rhythm she'd practiced 10,000 times on ranges across the world. Heart rate dropping, muscles relaxing, the weapon becoming an extension of her body. Lightning flashed, illuminating the compound in stark relief. In that moment of clarity, Ava saw everything. The guards on patrol, the vehicles ready for deployment, the pilots running toward the helicopters as someone sounded an alarm. They'd found Harris and Moore's bodies, realized some of the team had escaped. The hunt was intensifying, which made this the perfect moment. Thunder rolled across the island, and in its echo, Ava squeezed the trigger. The SR-25 kicked against her shoulder, and 800 meters away, the 308 round traveling at 2,800 feet per second punched through the transmitter housing with surgical precision. Sparks erupted from the impact point as delicate electronics shattered. The jamming signal, which had been a constant electromagnetic pressure since they'd been shot down, suddenly collapsed. For 3 seconds, the radio spectrum was clear. Any transmission in that window would reach its destination unimpeded. Then the chaos erupted. Contractors poured out of the buildings, weapons raised, searching for the sniper. Spotlights swept the ridgeline. Orders were shouted in multiple languages. The compound transformed from a confident operation to a disturbed ant nest. Ava was already repositioning, moving 20 meters to her left before any return fire could find her. She could see Parker leading Hayes and Wright down the eastern slope. Chen carried between them. They were moving too slowly, but there was nothing she could do about that now. Her job was to hold attention, to be the threat they couldn't ignore. So she found another position, acquired another target, a fuel truck parked near one of the helicopters, and fired again. The truck erupted in flames, and suddenly the compound was burning. The helicopter closest to the fire tried to lift off, but smoke and heat created dangerous flight conditions. It settled back onto the helipad, rotors spinning uselessly. Now every gun in the compound was oriented toward the ridgeline. Tracer rounds cut through the rain, searching for her. A rocket-propelled grenade detonated 30 meters to her right, spraying shrapnel that she felt rather than saw, hot fragments that missed by inches. But she'd achieved her objective. Wright's transmission was away, flying through the clear radio spectrum toward the Roosevelt, carrying with it their coordinates, their situation, and the evidence of betrayal that had led them here. All Ava had to do now was survive long enough for someone to receive it. She fired 3 more shots, aiming for targets of opportunity, keeping the compound in disarray. With each shot, she moved, never staying in one position long enough for return fire to find her. It was a deadly dance, one she'd performed in a dozen different countries, always with the same understanding. Eventually, the odds catch up to everyone. A helicopter finally managed to lift off, banking toward the ridgeline. Through her scope, Ava could see the door gunner preparing to engage. That was a problem. The SR-25 wasn't designed for anti-aircraft work, but she didn't have any other options. She aimed for the pilot, compensated for the helicopter's movement, and fired. The round punched through the cockpit canopy. The helicopter immediately went into an uncontrolled spin, the pilot dead or incapacitated. It crashed into the jungle 200 meters from the compound, adding another column of smoke to the burning morning. Beneath her, the island was waking to violence. The storm was finally breaking, clouds parting to reveal the first light of dawn, and in that growing light, Ava saw them. Boats approaching from the south, multiple vessels converging on the island. More contractors, or perhaps the enemy's main force, arriving to finish what they'd started. She had maybe 10 minutes before she was overrun. Time to make one final play. Ava pulled the encrypted data drive from her vest, the backup copy Wright had given her before they separated. If she died here, this information died with her. But if she could get it somewhere visible, somewhere a rescue team would find it, then everything they'd endured would matter. She wrapped the drive in waterproof material, attached it to a piece of reflective tape, and secured it to a prominent rock at the ridge's highest point. Then she backed away, putting distance between herself and that position. When they found her body and they would find her body, they wouldn't find the drive. But a rescue team, looking for survivors or remains, would spot the reflective marker and investigate. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all she had left. The contractors were closing in now, ascending the ridge from multiple directions. She could hear them calling out positions, coordinating their approach. Professional, patient, thorough, they knew they had her trapped. Ava checked her ammunition. 1 magazine remaining, 20 rounds. She could make those count. Drop maybe 4 or 5 more before they overwhelmed her position. Not bad for a last stand. She thought about Harris and more, about Chen dying in Hayes' arms, about Wright's desperate attempt to rig a transmission through impossible circumstances. She thought about the Barrett M82A1, her faithful companion for 4 years, abandoned in a ravine during a night firefight. She thought about Afghanistan, about the 17-mile walk through enemy territory when no one heard her distress calls. Some operators die in bed, old and comfortable, their wars long behind them. Others die young, in the mud and rain, fighting battles that never make the news. Ava had always known which category she'd fall into. She settled into her final position, weapon ready, and waited for the end. The shot that changed everything came at 0.612 hours, fired from a ridge 800 meters from a hidden compound, traveling through clear air for 2.3 seconds before striking a military-grade communications jammer and collapsing the electromagnetic interference that had isolated SEAL Team Delta since their insertion. At that exact moment, aboard the USS Roosevelt, Communications Specialist Second Class Diana Fletcher was running routine signal sweeps of the South China Sea operating area. She'd been on duty for 6 hours, monitoring frequencies, logging traffic, documenting the electromagnetic environment that naval operations depended on. When the jamming signal suddenly disappeared, Fletcher's equipment registered the change immediately. But it was what followed that made her grab her supervisor's attention. A burst transmission, encrypted, Priority Alpha, with authentication codes that made her blood run cold. "Chief," she called out, "I've got an emergency transmission from SEAL Team Delta. They're marked Kia on the operations board, but this signal just came through." Chief Petty Officer Raymond Santos was beside her in seconds. He verified the authentication codes, confirmed the encryption protocols, and made a decision that would later be called the fastest call in his career. "Don't route this through normal channels. Put me through to Admiral Morrison directly." Now, 30 seconds later, Rear Admiral James Morrison was reading the decoded transmission on his personal tablet, his expression darkening with each line. Grid coordinates, casualty reports, an encrypted data file that would require the NSA to crack, and a final line that made everything else pale in comparison. Betrayal suspected at common level. Request immediate extraction and investigation. Morrison had been in the Navy for 34 years. He'd seen combat, corruption, and cover-ups. But this operator's from an elite SEAL team, shot down and abandoned, claiming internal betrayal. This was different. This was the kind of situation that could either validate his career or end it. He made his choice in under 10 seconds. Sound General Quarters. Launch the alert helo with a full rescue package. I want 2 Super Hornets providing air cover, a destroyer moving to gun range of those coordinates, and every available asset pointed at that island. He looked at his operations officer and locked down all communications. No one talks to anyone until I understand what's happening. 8 minutes after Ava's shot collapsed the jamming, MH 60 seconds. Seahawks were lifting off the Roosevelt's deck, pilots fighting the tail end of the storm to reach the island. F, divided by A-18 Super Hornets, screamed overhead, their radar active, ready to engage any threat to the rescue operation. On the island, Ava heard them coming. The distinctive thud of naval rotors, growing louder, joined by the turbine scream of jets overhead. She'd been in combat long enough to recognize the sound of overwhelming force arriving to settle accounts. The contractors heard it too. Their assault on the ridge faltered as they realized they were about to face not an isolated group of survivors but the full weight of the United States Navy. Some tried to fall back to the compound. Others scattered into the jungle, hoping to disappear before the destroyers opened fire. Ava used the confusion to reposition one final time, moving down the ridge's back slope. Her ammunition was exhausted, her body operating on nothing but adrenaline and will. But she'd completed the mission. The transmission had gotten through. Help was coming. Whether it arrived in time to save her was no longer relevant. The first helicopter touched down on the beach where Parker, Hayes, and Chen had reached 15 minutes earlier. Navy corpsmen swarmed over Chen, working with practiced efficiency to stabilize him before loading him aboard. Hayes tried to report, to explain what had happened, but the crew chief cut him off. "Sir, save it for debrief. Right now we're getting you out." "There's still one operator on the ridge," Parker insisted. Staff Sergeant Ava Cole. "She held position to cover our escape." The crew chief checked his tablet, consulted the tactical display. "We've got a pilot reporting movement on the eastern ridge. If that's your operator, we'll find her." The second helicopter diverted toward Ava's last known position, the door gunners sweeping the area with mounted weapons. They'd been briefed to expect hostiles, to treat everyone not positively identified as friendlies as threats. The pilots could see contractors scattering below, could have engaged them easily, but their orders were clear: extract the SEAL team first, worry about the enemy later. Ava heard the helicopter before she saw it, the sound growing to overwhelming volume as it crested the ridge and descended toward her position. She stumbled into a clearing, waved her arms, and felt an almost dreamlike sense of unreality as the aircraft settled beside her. A crew chief jumped out, weapon ready, scanning for threats. "Staff Sergeant Cole, that's me." Her voice was raw, barely audible over the rotors. "You're a hard woman to kill." He grabbed her arm, helped her toward the helicopter. "Let's keep it that way." As they lifted off, Ava looked back at the island. Smoke rose from multiple points, the compound burning, the crashed helicopter, the evidence of a 12-hour battle that would never make the official records. Somewhere down there, Harris and Moore's bodies lay in a cave that might never be found. She'd make sure they weren't forgotten. She'd make sure their sacrifice meant something. But for now, she was just grateful to be alive, to feel the helicopter banking away from the island, to know that against all odds, some of them had survived. Below them, F divided by A-18 seconds made low passes over the compound, their presence a message. The United States Navy knew what had happened here, and there would be consequences. By the time the rescue package returned to the Roosevelt, Admiral Morrison had assembled his command staff and was reviewing the encrypted data file Wright had transmitted. What he found there would trigger an investigation that reached from the Pentagon to the halls of Congress, exposing a conspiracy that had used Special Operations Forces as pawns in an illegal weapons trafficking scheme. But that was for later. Right now, as Ava stepped onto the carrier's deck and felt solid steel beneath her feet, all she could think about was the fact that they'd made it. Despite betrayal, despite impossible odds, despite a 12-hour nightmare in a typhoon, she and 3 others had survived. Chen was rushed to the medical bay, where Navy surgeons went to work saving his life. Hayes and Wright were debriefed by intelligence officers, their testimony recorded and classified. Parker provided tactical details about the compound, about the contractors, about everything he'd observed. And Ava, still wet and exhausted and carrying the weight of 2 dead teammates, sat in a quiet room and told Admiral Morrison everything that had happened from the moment their helicopter had been shot down. When she finished, Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Staff Sergeant, what you and your team endured should never have happened. Someone is going to answer for this. That's a promise. Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted." "I don't care about promises," Ava said quietly. "I care about making sure Harris and Moore's families know they died as heroes, not as casualties of some classified mission that gets erased from the records. They held position so we could escape. They bought us time with their lives. That matters." "It does matter," Morrison agreed, "and I'll make sure it's remembered." Later that day, as Ava finally allowed herself to sleep, her last conscious thought was of a single shot fired through a storm, of a bullet that traveled 800 meters and changed everything, kind of the echo that carried through the night and told the world that SEAL Team Delta was still fighting. One shot, one moment, one decision that meant the difference between being forgotten and being heard. The echo would carry for a long time.